My husband and stepdaughter lied and accused my 14-year-old son of SA to destroy his future. So I revealed the truth and fought back hard. The metallic tang of fear coated my tongue, sharper than any iron I'd ever tasted. A police officer. In my living room. His presence wasn't for protection, but for prosecution. My son. My Caleb. His future, a fragile pane of glass, about to be shattered by a lie. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an act of war, declared by the very man I had chosen to build a family with, and orchestrated by a teenager barely old enough to understand the devastation she wrought. My hands trembled, not just from panic, but from a cold, simmering rage that had been brewing for weeks. It had begun innocuously enough, one Tuesday evening in March, a date now etched into my memory like a scar. Caleb, my 14-year-old, sat hunched over geometry homework at the kitchen table. The quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Then, the front door clicked open. My husband, Derek, walked in, his jaw set in that unmistakable way that always signaled trouble. Trailing behind him was his daughter, Vanessa, 16, her face a mask of carefully constructed distress. Her eyes were red-rimmed, mascara smudged beneath her lower lashes, a portrait of woe that felt theatrical. My stomach tightened, a familiar premonition twisting inside me. "We need to talk," Derek stated, his voice flat, carrying an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. Caleb, ever sensitive to the subtle shifts in emotional air pressure, began gathering his books without being asked. He was a good kid, quick to retreat from adult discord, always seeking peace. As he headed upstairs, Vanessa shot him a look I couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of something cold and calculating that made my son's shoulders tense, just for a moment, before he disappeared around the corner. That tiny exchange, a fleeting moment between two children, now felt like the first tremor before an earthquake. In our bedroom, Derek closed the door with a deliberate click that echoed the finality of a prison cell. Vanessa perched on the edge of our bed, her hands twisting in her lap, looking for all the world like a frightened bird. The scene felt staged, meticulously rehearsed. "Vanessa told me something extremely disturbing today," Derek began, refusing to meet my eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. "About Caleb?" I managed to choke out. "What about Caleb?" Vanessa's voice, when it came, was small, trembling, perfectly pitched for maximum effect. "He's been making me uncomfortable, touching me when you're not around, saying things." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with sickening force. Not because I believed them, Caleb, predatory? The idea was ludicrous, like accusing a kitten of being a tiger, but because I could feel the immediate, unyielding weight of Derek's conviction. "What are you talking about?" "Caleb would never," I protested, the words catching in my throat. "She came to me crying after school," Derek interrupted, his face flushed with a righteous anger that chilled me to the bone. "She's been terrified to say anything because she didn't want to cause problems." I stared at Vanessa, desperate to find a crack in her performance, anything. But her gaze remained fixed somewhere over my shoulder, carefully avoiding mine. Everything about this felt wrong, yet Derek's protective stance over his daughter created an immediate, impenetrable barrier between us. "I need to hear exactly what you're claiming," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the rising panic that threatened to consume me. Vanessa's story emerged in halting fragments. Caleb had supposedly cornered her in the hallway last week, made inappropriate comments about her appearance, brushed against her deliberately. She even claimed he'd tried to follow her into the bathroom 2 days prior. Each accusation felt like a hammer blow, not to my belief in Caleb, but to the fragile edifice of my marriage. Derek stood there, nodding, his face growing darker with each damning detail his daughter provided. "This is insane," I finally blurted out. "Caleb is 14 years old. He's never shown any behavior remotely like this. He's respectful. He's kind." "You're his mother," Derek cut me off, his tone dismissive. "You're not objective. Vanessa has no reason to lie." The chilling certainty in his voice was a revelation. We had spent 3 years carefully building our blended family, navigating the complexities of 2 households converging. Derek had always been good with Caleb, cheering at his track meets, helping with science projects. The sudden, absolute shift was disorienting, terrifying. Educational Insight 1. Confirmation bias and paternal guilt. In situations of high emotional stress, individuals are prone to confirmation bias, where they selectively interpret new information to support existing beliefs or desires. Derek's powerful guilt over his perceived past failures as a father to Vanessa, combined with an inherent instinct to protect his child, created a potent cocktail that made him susceptible to her narrative, regardless of its truthfulness. This emotional investment effectively blinded him to any contradictory evidence, making him an ideal target for manipulation. "I want to talk to Caleb," I insisted, desperately clinging to reason. "Absolutely not," Derek said firmly. "Not until we figure out how to handle this properly." That night, I lay awake, the silence of Derek's snores beside me mocking my racing thoughts. Vanessa's accusations replayed in my mind, each one feeling more fabricated than the last. My son was painfully shy around girls, still awkward in his growing body, far more interested in video games and cross-country running than anything else. The idea of him acting predatory was absurd, grotesque. But Derek's reaction terrified me more than the accusations themselves. He had accepted his daughter's story without question, without even a flicker of doubt, never considering an alternative explanation. The foundation of our marriage suddenly felt like quicksand beneath my feet. The next morning, I waited until Derek left for work before approaching Caleb. He sat at the kitchen counter, eating cereal, scrolling through his phone, a picture of teenage normalcy. "Has anything unusual happened with Vanessa lately?" I asked, carefully, trying to sound casual. His confusion was genuine. "Like what?" he asked, milk dribbling down his chin. "She barely talks to me." I pressed. "Has she seemed upset? Or have you two argued about anything?" Caleb shrugged. "She's always on her phone, or locked in her room. We don't really interact that much." His nonchalance was more convincing than any passionate denial could have been. Caleb didn't have the awareness that something serious was brewing. He was still operating in the regular rhythm of teenage life, utterly oblivious to the storm gathering around him. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that my son's innocence was his greatest vulnerability. Over the next week, Derek grew increasingly distant. He started working late, coming home after dinner and retreating straight to his home office. Vanessa, meanwhile, moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding me entirely, yet clinging to her father whenever he was present. The atmosphere became suffocating, heavy with unspoken accusations and resentment. Then came the bombshell, dropped casually over breakfast as if he were mentioning a dentist appointment rather than potentially detonating our entire family. "I've contacted an attorney." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "An attorney? For what?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "To understand our options," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "We need to protect Vanessa." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He saw Caleb as a threat, something to be managed and contained. My son. The boy who still slept with a stuffed dog he'd had since he was 6, who cried during sad movies, who volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday. "Derek, please," I pleaded, reaching for his hand. He pulled away as if I were contaminated. "Let's get them both into counseling. Let's actually investigate what's happening here before we blow up our entire family." "My daughter's safety isn't negotiable," he replied coldly. "If you can't see that, we have bigger problems." The threat was explicit, undeniable. Choose your son or choose this marriage. But for me, it wasn't a choice at all. And Derek knew it. I began documenting everything. Times, dates, who was where in the house, any interactions between Caleb and Vanessa. The pattern that emerged was clear. They barely occupied the same space. When their paths did cross, their exchanges were brief, unremarkable. Caleb would offer a polite greeting. Vanessa would grunt a response. They'd go their separate ways. During this clandestine surveillance of my own home, I noticed something else. Vanessa spent hours on her phone, always angled away from view, always quickly switching screens if anyone approached. Her behavior grew more secretive, more calculated. She would emerge from her room at strategic times, usually when Derek was home, ensuring her presence was noted, her fragility observed. The tension in the house became unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on us all. Derek started sleeping in the guest room, claiming he needed space to think. What he really needed was distance from me, from the doubt I represented. Every conversation felt like navigating a minefield, each word carefully chosen to avoid triggering another argument. My work suffered. I'd sit at my desk, staring at spreadsheets without actually seeing the numbers, my mind constantly spinning through scenarios and possibilities. Colleagues noticed my distraction, but were too polite to comment. How could I explain that my entire life was imploding because my stepdaughter had decided to weaponize a lie? One evening, I came home to find Derek had installed a lock on Vanessa's bedroom door. The message was clear, chillingly so: protection from the perceived threat living under our roof. Caleb noticed it too, though he didn't say anything. His face just closed off a little more, another layer of hurt settling over him like dust. I reached out to Caleb's school counselor, Mrs. Armstrong, explaining the situation in bare, cautious terms. She'd known Caleb since 6th grade and immediately offered support. "That boy doesn't have a malicious bone in his body," she said firmly. "I've worked with hundreds of kids over 20 years. You develop an instinct. Caleb is one of the genuinely good ones." Her words were a lifeline I clung to during the darkest moments. When Derek's unwavering certainty made me question my own judgment, I'd remember Mrs. Armstrong's assessment. Professional validation mattered, especially when my husband treated me like I was delusional. I also reached out to parents of Caleb's friends, carefully fishing for information without revealing the full, horrifying situation. Every single one had only positive things to say. Caleb was respectful, polite, the kind of kid they were happy to have their children spend time with. One mother even mentioned her daughter had a small crush on him last year, and Caleb had been so awkward and sweet about it that it became a running family joke. These testimonials to my son's character reinforced what I already knew. But they also served another, more pragmatic purpose. I was building a case, gathering character witnesses for a battle I hoped wouldn't come, but suspected was inevitable. Patricia, the attorney I eventually hired, had advised me to prepare for the worst-case scenario. And the worst case was criminal charges that could follow Caleb for life. Meanwhile, Derek doubled down on his position. He started talking about sending Caleb to live with my ex-husband in Colorado, getting him out of the house for everyone's safety. The suggestion made my blood boil. Caleb hadn't seen his biological father in 4 years, not since the man decided his new family was more important than his old one. "Absolutely not," I told Derek flatly. "You're not shipping my son off like unwanted furniture." "Then what's your solution?" he demanded. "We can't keep living like this, with Vanessa terrified in her own home." "Vanessa isn't terrified," I shot back, my voice rising. "She's performing, and you're the only one buying tickets to the show." The argument escalated, voices rising until we were both shouting. Then, Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, her timing impeccable as always. She looked small and frightened, playing her role to perfection. Derek immediately softened, going to comfort his daughter while shooting me a look of pure disgust. That was the moment I knew the marriage was truly over. Derek had chosen his side, and no amount of evidence or logic would change his mind. His guilt over being an absent father for most of Vanessa's life had created a blind spot she exploited masterfully. I started making plans to leave. Quietly, carefully, I began separating our finances, closing joint credit cards, transferring money into accounts Derek couldn't access. My brother, Thomas, offered his spare room without hesitation when I called him late one night, crying so hard I could barely speak. "Pack your stuff and Caleb's," Thomas said simply. "Come whenever you're ready. You can stay as long as you need." The sheer kindness nearly broke me all over again. In the midst of Derek's betrayal, having someone believe in me without question felt like oxygen after drowning. One afternoon, I picked up Caleb early from track practice. We stopped for burgers on the way home, and I watched my son devour 2 cheeseburgers while telling me about his improving race times. He was so normal, so innocent, so completely unaware of the bomb ticking beneath our lives. "Can I ask you something?" I ventured carefully. "How do you feel about Vanessa living with us?" Caleb considered this while working through a pile of fries. "She's fine, I guess. Kind of annoying sometimes. She uses all the hot water and takes forever in the bathroom." He paused. Why? Just wondering how you're adjusting to having a stepsister. It's whatever. He shrugged. She mostly ignores me, which is cool. I've got my own stuff going on anyway. His indifference was damning to Vanessa's narrative. A kid harboring inappropriate feelings wouldn't be this dismissive, this uninterested. But I knew Derek wouldn't see it that way. He would twist every piece of evidence to support his daughter's version of events. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the initial accusation. I came home from work to find Derek and Vanessa sitting together on the couch, a police officer standing awkwardly by the fireplace. Officer Ramirez introduced himself, his presence filling our living room with an official gravity that made my breath catch in my throat. We filed the report, Derek announced, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. To create a paper trail. The world tilted sideways. A police report meant permanent records, potential criminal charges. Caleb's future, destroyed before it even began. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. You called the police without even telling me, I managed to ask, though my voice sounded distant, alien, to my own ears. I'm doing what's necessary to protect my daughter, Derek said, and the emphasis on my cut deep, a wound straight to the heart. Officer Ramirez looked uncomfortable, caught in a family drama unfolding before him. He asked Vanessa several questions, taking notes on a small pad. She repeated her story with remarkable consistency, every detail matching what she'd told Derek, delivered with just the right amount of trembling emotion. When the officer asked to speak with Caleb, my protective instincts surged, primal and fierce. Not without an attorney present, I said firmly, stepping forward. Derek's eyes flashed with anger. That makes him look guilty. That protects his rights, I shot back, since apparently his stepfather has already decided he's some kind of predator. Officer Ramirez held up a calming hand. Let's all take a breath here. Mrs. Patterson, I understand this is difficult. I have kids myself, but we need to follow proper protocol. Caleb appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the raised voices. When he saw the uniform, confusion and fear crossed his face in rapid succession. He looked at me silently, asking what was happening, and I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. That night, after Officer Ramirez left with assurances that he'd be in touch, I packed bags for Caleb and myself. Derek stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me throw clothes into a suitcase. You're choosing him over Vanessa, he said flatly. Over the evidence, over common sense. I'm choosing truth over lies, I replied, zipping the bag with more force than necessary. And I'm protecting my son from a false accusation that you're too blind to see through. Vanessa wouldn't lie about something like this. I turned to face him fully. Wouldn't she? Do you really know your daughter that well? She lived with her mother for 14 years, and you've had her for 8 months. You're operating on hope and guilt, not knowledge. Something flickered in Derek's expression, quickly suppressed. Maybe doubt, maybe recognition, but he'd committed too far to back down now. If you walk out that door, don't come back, he said. I never planned to, I replied, and walked past him, leaving behind not just a house, but a life. We stayed with my brother Thomas for the first week. His apartment was cramped, but he didn't ask questions, just helped Caleb set up the pull-out couch and ordered pizza. My son retreated into himself, barely speaking, jumping at sudden sounds. The weight of the accusation was crushing him, even though he didn't fully understand it yet. It was heartbreaking to watch a vibrant boy shrink, to see the sparkle dim in his eyes. Educational insight too. The silent burden of false accusation in adolescence. For an adolescent, a false accusation of this nature carries a profound and disproportionate psychological burden. Unlike adults, teenagers often lack the developed coping mechanisms and social support networks to effectively process such an intense emotional and social trauma. The resulting fear, shame, and isolation can lead to withdrawal, anxiety, and a deep distrust of authority figures, potentially impacting their identity formation and future relationships. Caleb's retreat was a classic manifestation of this silent burden. I hired an attorney named Patricia Wolfe, a stern woman in her 50s who specialized in defending juveniles. She listened to everything with sharp, analytical eyes, taking meticulous notes, asking pointed questions. The good news is there's no physical evidence because nothing happened, Patricia said during our second meeting. The bad news is it's still he said she said, and in the current climate, accusations alone can be devastating. So what do we do? I asked, feeling helpless. We build a counter-narrative, she declared. We gather character witnesses, document Caleb's whereabouts and behaviors, and we investigate Vanessa, because teenagers don't usually make accusations like this without motivation. The word motivation stuck with me. What would drive a 16-year-old girl to falsely accuse her stepbrother of something so serious? I started digging into Vanessa's life, looking for answers. Social media provided the first clue. Vanessa's Instagram was private, but her friend Brittany's account was public. Photos from the past few months showed Vanessa at parties I knew nothing about, holding red cups, making duck faces with groups of kids who looked older than high school age. In one photo, tagged at a location 40 miles from our house on a Tuesday night when she'd supposedly been home studying, Vanessa wore a tight dress and heavy makeup I'd never seen her in. I screenshot everything, building a digital file of evidence. Patricia had warned me to be thorough, to leave no stone unturned. The deeper I looked, the more a picture emerged of a girl leading a double life, a life her father knew nothing about. My breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Caleb's friend Mason mentioned in passing that some kids at school were saying Vanessa had a boyfriend, an older boyfriend, college age. The information seemed irrelevant until I connected it to her late-night absences and secretive phone behavior. I reached out to a private investigator recommended by Patricia. Gerald Marcus was a former police detective who now handled domestic cases. He was expensive, but I drained my savings account without hesitation. My son's future was worth every penny. Gerald worked fast. Within a week, he had a name, Kyle Thornton, 23 years old, currently on probation for drug possession. He'd been seeing Vanessa for at least 3 months, picking her up from locations near our house and taking her to his apartment across town. Your husband has no idea? Gerald asked, sliding photos across his desk. They showed Vanessa getting into Kyle's beat-up Honda, kissing him at a gas station, entering his apartment building at night. Derek sees what he wants to see, I said bitterly. A perfect daughter who needs protection from my terrible son. Gerald continued, there's more. Kyle has a record. Nothing violent, but multiple drug charges, theft, violating probation. If Vanessa's father knew she was involved with this guy, he'd lose his mind. Understanding dawned slowly. Vanessa wasn't being victimized by Caleb. She was creating a smokescreen to hide her own activities. By making Derek focus on a threat inside the house, he wasn't paying attention to what was happening outside it. Gerald provided additional details that painted an even clearer picture. Kyle worked sporadically at an auto body shop, lived in a rundown complex known for drug activity, and had violated his probation twice in the past year. He was exactly the kind of person Derek would lose his mind over if he knew his precious daughter was involved with him. The investigator had also discovered that Vanessa had been skipping classes regularly, forging absence notes with surprising skill. Her grades had dropped significantly over the past semester, something Derek apparently hadn't noticed because she'd been intercepting progress reports and report cards before he saw them. She's not just lying about your son, Gerald explained. She's constructed an entire false reality. The accusation against Caleb is just one piece of a much larger deception. This girl has been playing her father like a violin for months. Educational Insight 3. Adolescent Manipulation and Projective Behavior. Adolescents, particularly those facing consequences for undisclosed behaviors, may resort to complex manipulative strategies to deflect attention and avoid accountability. Vanessa's actions demonstrate a form of projective behavior, where she shifts blame onto an innocent party, Caleb, to create a more palatable narrative for her father and divert his scrutiny. This can be exacerbated by underlying issues such as poor impulse control, a desire for autonomy, or a history of avoiding consequences. Her elaborate deception highlights a deep-seated pattern of avoidance rather than an isolated incident. I felt sick looking at the evidence spread before me. Not just because of what Vanessa had done to Caleb, but because of how thoroughly she'd manipulated Derek. My husband prided himself on being perceptive, on reading people. Discovering his daughter had fooled him so completely would devastate him. But he deserved that devastation. He had chosen willful blindness over truth, chosen to believe the worst about an innocent child rather than question his own daughter's motives. Whatever pain he experienced from this revelation was entirely earned. Gerald also uncovered something I hadn't expected. Vanessa had a history at her previous school in New York. Before she moved to Paris with her mother, there had been an incident. Another false accusation against a male student, though that one had been quickly disproven. The school's response had been to recommend counseling, which Vanessa's mother had apparently ignored. "So, she's done this before," I said, my voice hollow. "Pattern of behavior," Gerald confirmed. "She uses accusations as weapons when she feels threatened or cornered." The previous incident happened right before her mother discovered she was dating a boy the mother disapproved of. Sound familiar? The parallels were chilling. Vanessa had a playbook, and she'd simply run the same play again with different victims. Caleb had been unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when she needed a distraction. Armed with this information, I felt my resolve harden into something diamond-sharp. This wasn't just about clearing Caleb's name anymore. It was about stopping a pattern, about preventing Vanessa from doing this to someone else down the line. If Derek wouldn't hold his daughter accountable, I would force the issue. "We need definitive proof," Patricia advised when I brought her Gerald's findings. "Right now. It shows she's dishonest about her activities, but we need to connect it directly to the false accusation." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Derek called me 2 days later, his voice strained. "Vanessa's been having nightmares, crying in her sleep. This is serious trauma, and it's getting worse." I bit back the angry response that wanted to escape. Instead, I said carefully, "Has she considered talking to a counselor?" "She's terrified Caleb will retaliate if she pursues this further," Derek said. "But I think we need to move forward with formal charges." The threat was explicit. If I didn't act fast, my son would face criminal prosecution based on manufactured evidence. I called an emergency meeting with Patricia and Gerald. "We go on offense," Patricia decided. "We expose everything and force Derek to confront reality. It's risky, but you're out of time." I composed a detailed email to Derek, attaching every photo Gerald had collected, every piece of evidence showing Vanessa's secret life. I included timestamps proving she'd lied about her whereabouts dozens of times. I added screenshots of her social media showing behavior completely at odds with the innocent victim narrative she'd constructed. And I finished with a simple statement: "Your daughter is lying about Caleb to hide her relationship with a 23-year-old man on probation." But before I sent it, I did one more thing. I compiled a separate document outlining Vanessa's history at her previous school, the pattern of false accusations, and a detailed timeline showing how her current accusation coincided perfectly with the start of her relationship with Kyle. I included statements from Caleb's teachers, his school counselor, and parents of his friends. I attached medical records showing Caleb had been at the orthodontist during one of the times Vanessa claimed he'd cornered her. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Even Derek, in his most stubborn state of denial, would have difficulty dismissing this mountain of proof. I saved everything to a secure cloud drive and sent copies to Patricia, just in case Derek tried to claim I'd fabricated anything. Then I called my brother. "I'm sending it tonight," I told him. "Tomorrow, everything changes." "You sure you're ready for the fallout?" he asked gently. "I'm ready for the truth to matter more than Derek's feelings," I replied. "Caleb deserves that much." I hit send at midnight, then lay awake, waiting for the explosion. Derek called at 6 in the morning. "We need to meet now." We chose a coffee shop halfway between Thomas's apartment and what used to be my home. Derek looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He had his laptop open when I arrived, the photos displayed on the screen. In the harsh morning light of the coffee shop, Derek looked like a stranger. The man I'd married 3 years ago had been confident, self-assured, quick to smile. The person sitting across from me now seemed diminished, his shoulders hunched as if bearing invisible weight. "I stayed up all night going through everything," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Every photo, every document, every statement. I must have read it all 5 times. And?" I prompted, though I could already see the answer in his defeated posture. "I went to her room around 4 in the morning, woke her up, and made her look at the evidence with me. At first, she tried to deny it. Said the photos were doctored, that you'd made everything up because you were protecting Caleb. But you didn't believe her this time, I stated rather than asked. Derek shook his head slowly. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to believe my daughter, but the evidence was too thorough. Phone records don't lie. GPS data doesn't lie. And when I confronted her with the information about her previous school, something in her just broke. He rubbed his face with both hands, looking older than his 42 years. She admitted everything. The boyfriend, the sneaking out, the failing grades she'd been hiding. And she admitted that the accusation against Caleb was fabricated to keep my attention elsewhere. Hearing him say it brought no satisfaction, only a hollow ache. Vindication felt empty when it came at such cost. How long have you known? He asked, without preamble. About a week. I hired an investigator after you filed that police report. He scrolled through the images, his jaw working. This doesn't prove she lied about Caleb. Derek, look at the pattern. She's been sneaking out to see this guy for months. You had no idea because she created a distraction by accusing Caleb. She made you focus on a fake threat so you wouldn't notice the real problem. You're twisting this to protect your son, he insisted, but the certainty had drained from his voice. I leaned forward. I have phone records showing she texted Kyle the same night she first made the accusation. Want to know what she said? Got my dad focused on something else for a while. Gerald got the records through Kyle's probation officer. Derek's face went pale. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. His perfect victim daughter had manipulated him completely. And watching him realize it felt like witnessing a building collapse. I confronted her this morning, he finally admitted. Before you got here, I showed her the photos. And she admitted it. All of it. The boyfriend, the lies, everything. His voice cracked. She said she panicked when I started asking why she was coming home so late. She needed a story that would keep me distracted. The vindication felt hollow. I'd been right, but the damage was already done. My marriage was destroyed. Caleb had suffered weeks of stress and fear, and Derek had to live with knowing he failed both his daughter and his stepson. You owe Caleb an apology, I said quietly. A real one. In person. Derek nodded slowly, staring into his untouched coffee. What she did to him, to you, to us. I don't know how to fix it. You can't, I replied honestly. You believed her without question. You were ready to destroy a 14-year-old boy's life, without a shred of actual evidence. That's not something you just apologize away. I was trying to protect my daughter. You were trying to be the father you haven't been for the past 14 years, I corrected. You were operating from guilt, not reason. And Vanessa knew exactly how to exploit that. We sat in silence for a long moment, the coffee shop bustling around us with the morning rush. Derek looked broken, aged 10 years overnight. Part of me felt sorry for him. The larger part remembered the cold certainty in his voice when he told me not to come back. I withdrew the police report, Derek said eventually. Filed the retraction this morning. Officer Ramirez wasn't surprised. He said something felt off about the whole thing from the beginning. Small comfort, but I'd take it. At least Caleb wouldn't have this following him forever in official records. What happens with Vanessa? I asked. She's going back to her mother's. I already called. Turns out Paris wasn't working out anyway, and she's moving back to Boston next month. Derek laughed bitterly. Vanessa can be her problem for a while. I clearly don't know how to handle a teenage girl. And us. He finally met my eyes. There is no us anymore, is there? You'll file for divorce. It wasn't a question, so I didn't treat it like one. My attorney is drawing up papers. You'll be served next week. Derek nodded, accepting the inevitable. I'll sign whatever you want. The house, assets, whatever. I owe you at least that. I don't want your guilt money, I said sharply. I want a fair division and full custody of Caleb, with no visitation for Vanessa, ever. Done. We stood simultaneously, two people who'd once promised forever now eager to escape each other's presence. At the door, Derek caught my arm. Tell Caleb I'm sorry, he said. Tell him I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. Tell him yourself, I replied, pulling away. You owe him that much. Derek did come by Thomas's apartment 3 days later. I left them alone in the small living room, listening from the kitchen as my ex-husband stumbled through an apology to my son. Caleb's responses were monosyllabic, guarded. The easy relationship they'd once had was gone, destroyed as thoroughly as our marriage. Through the thin walls, I heard Derek's voice crack as he tried to explain his actions. He talked about failing as a father to Vanessa for so many years, about overcompensating, about wanting so desperately to believe his daughter that he'd abandoned all reason. The excuses sounded hollow even to my ears, and I knew they landed even worse with Caleb. My son said very little in response, an occasional, okay, or I guess, that carried no forgiveness, only exhaustion. Derek had wanted Caleb to understand his perspective, but understanding and absolving are completely different things. A 14-year-old shouldn't have to parse the complex psychology of adult failures. When Derek finally stood to leave, I heard him ask if they could maybe throw a football around sometime, try to rebuild what they'd had. The silence that followed was painful. Then Caleb's quiet voice, I don't think so. Not right now. Maybe not ever. The finality in those words must have crushed Derek, but he'd earned every ounce of that rejection. He taught Caleb a brutal lesson about how quickly trust could be destroyed, and how thoroughly adults could fail the children depending on them. When Derek left, Caleb came into the kitchen and hugged me, something he hadn't done in months. At 14, he was already taller than me, but in that moment, he felt small and young again. I don't understand why she did it, he said into my shoulder. I barely even talked to her. Some people hurt others to protect themselves, I explained, smoothing his hair. It wasn't about you. You were just convenient. Derek really thought I did those things. He wanted to believe his daughter, I said, drawing back slightly. Parents do foolish things sometimes when they're trying to make up for past mistakes. Caleb pulled back, looking at me seriously. You never doubted me. Not once. Not for a second, I confirmed. I know who you are. Nobody can tell me different. Educational insight 4. The core of resilience and parental trust. A child's ability to navigate and recover from traumatic events, like false accusations, is profoundly anchored in the unwavering trust and advocacy of their primary caregiver. This foundational belief provides a secure base from which a child can begin to process injustice, fostering resilience and preventing the internalization of undeserved shame. Caleb's journey exemplifies how consistent parental trust acts as a critical protective factor, safeguarding a child's self-worth and emotional well-being against external assaults. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once Derek committed to not fighting. He signed over his share of the home equity, agreed to my custody terms, and transferred half of his retirement account without contest. His attorney seemed surprised by how thoroughly he'd capitulated, but I understood. Derek wasn't being generous. He was punishing himself. Vanessa moved to Boston before the papers were finalized. I heard through mutual friends that she'd broken up with Kyle after her father threatened to report him for statutory involvement with a minor. She started therapy, apparently working through her issues with a professional instead of destroying innocent people. I felt no sympathy for her consequences. She'd been willing to ruin Caleb's entire future to cover her own bad choices. The fact that she was 16 didn't excuse the calculated cruelty of her actions. Caleb and I moved into a smaller house across town once the divorce settled. A fresh start, a new neighborhood. Away from the memories. His track coach from school helped him transfer to a team in our new district. And slowly, gradually, my son started smiling again. The new house was a 2-bedroom ranch with a fenced backyard and outdated kitchen counters that I promised myself I'd eventually replace. It was roughly half the size of the home Derek and I had shared, but it felt more like ours than that place ever had. Caleb picked the bedroom with better natural light for his growing collection of track medals and science fair ribbons. We established new routines in that house. Saturday morning pancakes became our tradition, something we'd never done before because Derek preferred going out for breakfast. Caleb started inviting friends over again, his laughter echoing through the hallways as teenage boys do when they're comfortable and safe. The sound was medicine for both of us. His grades improved almost immediately. Teachers commented on his renewed focus and participation in class. Mrs. Armstrong called to tell me she'd never seen such a dramatic positive shift in a student after a difficult period. Removing the constant stress of living under suspicion had freed Caleb to be himself again. Patricia Wolfe sent a final bill with a note attached. Your instinct to fight was right. Trust yourself. The words meant more than she probably knew. I doubted myself so many times during the ordeal, wondering if I was being blind or defensive. But a mother knows her child, and I'd known Caleb was innocent from the first accusation. 6 months after everything imploded, I ran into Derek at a grocery store. We did the awkward dance of former spouses, exchanging stilted pleasantries while avoiding real conversation. He looked tired, diminished somehow. Before we parted, he asked about Caleb. He's good, I said simply. Back to normal mostly. Still runs track. Still gets A's in math and C's in English. I'm glad, Derek replied, and seemed to mean it. Tell him I think about him sometimes. I hope he's doing well. I didn't promise to pass along the message. Some bridges, once burned, don't need rebuilding. As I drove home with groceries in the trunk and the afternoon sun warming the dashboard, I thought about the chain of events that had brought me here. A false accusation, a destroyed marriage, thousands spent on attorneys and investigators. On paper, it looked like devastation. But Caleb was safe. His name was clear. His future remained intact, and I'd learned something invaluable about trusting my instincts, about fighting for truth, even when everyone else accepts convenient lies. Revenge wasn't destroying Derek's life, or exposing Vanessa publicly. Revenge was simply refusing to let them win, refusing to let evil triumph through inaction. Sometimes the most brutal vengeance is surviving with integrity while others drown in their own deception. Caleb was waiting when I got home, helping me unload groceries without being asked. He'd grown another inch over the summer, all legs and ankles. Soon he'd be taller than Thomas, taller than Derek had been. A good kid growing into a good man, despite someone's best efforts to derail him. Mom, he asked as we put away cereal boxes. Do you think Vanessa ever feels bad about what she did? I considered the question carefully. Maybe. People's consciences work differently, but whether she feels bad or not doesn't change what happened. Your job isn't to worry about her feelings. Your job is to keep being yourself. He nodded, satisfied with the answer. That was the thing about Caleb. He didn't carry grudges, didn't obsess over injustice. He'd been hurt, but he wasn't broken. Some kids would have emerged from this ordeal bitter and distrustful. My son just kept running his races and doing his homework and believing in basic goodness. The real victory wasn't in exposing Vanessa's lies or forcing Derek to face his mistakes. The real triumph was that Caleb came through it whole, his character intact, his future unlimited. Everything I'd fought for, every dollar spent and sleepless night endured, had been worth it to preserve that. As for Derek and Vanessa, they'd have to live with their choices. Derek would always know he'd been willing to sacrifice an innocent kid for his own guilt. Vanessa would carry the knowledge of the damage she'd caused for a relationship that lasted less than a year. Those burdens were their own revenge, more thorough and lasting than anything I could have devised. Justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and patient. Sometimes it's just a mother believing her son when the whole world seems ready to condemn him and fighting until truth wins. And sometimes, the most brutal revenge is simply living well while those who wronged you collapse under the weight of their own actions. So, I ask you, in a world where truth is often subjective and perception is reality, how far would you go to prove the innocence of someone you love, knowing it could destroy everything else in your life?